when I look back, being a teenager in Japan, growing up in a traditional city in Japan called Kyoto. Well, now actually I create fashion, but back then actually I was consuming fashion. 14 years ago in Rana Boutique, that's how I started my own career, I guess, as a fashion designer. And but it was such a humble beginning. For instance, I was working as a tour guide part-time, and she was minding a shop while actually I was absent and looking after my clients. So, you know, we share a lot. We share our past, and more importantly, we share presence.
Akira Isogawa is a Japanese-born Australian designer who achieved significant local as well as international success over the last 3 decades. He is remarkable. Isogawa's kimono-inspired designs seamlessly blended his Japanese heritage with contemporary Australian style, showcasing intricate detail and exquisite craftsmanship. His work has been showcased on runways worldwide, especially in Paris, where he showed for several years. And he's received numerous accolades for his contributions to the Australian fashion industry.
My name is Akira Isogawa. I'm a fashion designer based in Sydney, Australia. We've been in business, we meaning actually myself and a team, in being in business for now at least 25 years. My interest in fashion began as far as actually the age of maybe 4 or 5 years, like drawing, like, you know, say example, sketching some sort of a female figure often, playing with flowers, like, you know, crushing flowers actually, and then finding actually essence of colors. I left Japan February 1986. Yeah, arrived in Sydney then. I was invited to this party called Rap Party, and well, by a friend of mine who I met by just accident really. I went to a store. The manager of that store told me about Rap Party. Yeah, so we went together. The Rat Party was all about visual, the costume, and hair and makeup. I start making a costume for myself to wear, and also I start being asked to make some outfits for others. That event of myself discovering that particular scene, underground creative scene, made an impression of Sydney quite different from actually like in the concept I had about Sydney prior. 1993, when I first opened my own boutique in Queen Street, Ulara, I had an industrial sewing machine and a cutting table in my house. Physically, it was quite difficult for me to make so many garments to fill the shop, all with my own design.
You know, dealing with Akira and being friends with Akira, the word icon just doesn't even come into his vocabulary. And I think also what we've got to consider about Akira is that he also came from a music industry in the 90s when all those rap parties were there. Do you remember those? Yeah. So, you know, culturally, you know, he was very involved in this whole sort of dance party underground rave scene that we talk about music, fashion and food and stuff like that. And that was sort of part of him. And then to suddenly see that he, you know, had gone to Paris and, you know, was showing with the best of the best, you know, it's incredible.
Oh, it's a wonderful personal story. My involvement initially with Akira, a very dear friend of mine who was his boyfriend at the time, Jack Vidgen. Jack was the legendary promoter of the rat parties in Sydney, and I'd known for many years. Called me up and said, "You've got to meet this new kid. He's just incredible. You know, he's just arrived from Japan. We're living together. He's creating these beautiful things on our floor at home. You've got to get him involved in Australian Fashion Week." I'm like, "Jack, yeah, you and every other emerging designer is on my phone right now." And he's like, "No, Jack, you know, this kid is special." So I went and met him and saw what he was doing and really did recognise the genius that we all know as Akira. And so he only had a very small collection at the time, and I had created this group collection, so-called the New Generation Collection, which was specifically to lift up and showcase those young emerging, well, not necessarily always young, but that emerging talent that was coming through Australia. And so it was the perfect vehicle for Akira. He only had to show 8 or 12 pieces, and he was able to do that. You know, as legend would have it, you know, he was so impoverished in putting this whole collection together that he couldn't even afford shoes for the models. So he sent them all out in hole-proof red socks, which of course is now a legendary image within the Australian fashion industry. And of course, what happened that day, he was the star of the New Generation show, and I had Miss Joan Bernstein sitting in the front row, who was one of the most prestigious buyers from Browns in London and a close personal friend of ours. And she was just blown away by what she saw at Akira, ran backstage, threw her arms around Akira, and created an exclusive with him for Browns in the UK. This was Mrs. B. This was the lady that put Alexander McQueen on the map, who broke, you know, Donna Karan and Calvin Klein into Europe, and now she was throwing her arms around Akira. I mean, this is one of the moments that just made me feel so proud to be able to give these opportunities to the amazing designers. And of course, you know, the rest is history with Akira, who's one of Australia's most loved designers now.
I rather rely on craftsmanship than the color palette of this season. And I find it such a relief to be able to detach myself from season to season's trend. I find it something solid, and I find it something that I can entirely rely on.
So I'm here in the back parts of Marrickville, calling in to see Akira Isogawa. Now, it's a very industrial part of Marrickville, and it's where Akira has had his workspace studio Italia for many decades. And we're going to go in and have a look around.
Akira, I'll give my question. Good to see you. Thank you for welcoming us into your workspace.
No, I feel like for myself, really, depends on actually the vision of designers, where you want to go. But I feel like so privileged to be still able to actually connect with the clients on one-to-one basis. Because loyal clients of, say, for example, last actually 30 years still come to actually to my studio. And then they were quite mature ladies now, but it's so nice to stay in touch with them, and it's really nice to stay in touch with someone like yourself. Yeah, and that's I think for me it's like the personal connection speaks more than anything. Yeah. So I get a lot of joy out of it. Yeah. Here's actually, I nearly said leftovers, but there's still a lot of actually garments here, organized year by year or collection by collection. This material is actually Japanese material, which is vintage obi, and then actually unpicked and then sold into actually shawl. So this is going to actually Art Gallery Victoria, and this selection is going to actually State Gallery of South Australia in Adelaide. Yeah, that's authentic kimono. That was a show in year 1998 at Australian Fashion Week. For example, that was a vintage kimono, and I unpicked it and I put it.
Kimono fabric, wow.
Yeah, this is one kimono.
Incredible.
It's one kimono. Yeah, it's
more than a kilo.
It's one kimono. Yeah. So just a random pieces from that show. That's from that show. So I had a model wearing this vintage kimono top, and then got her to wear obi, and then jacket. Can't think of doing anything else apart from really designing and making clothes. And also I hate to see people naked. I had to talk to my parents, and then I said, look, I found what I really wanted to do, which is fashion. And I want to actually study fashion. I'm not really trying to make art here. I'm just trying to make a collection here, which actually people can wear. In my career, I had a few standout events that occurred. Our first one would have been actually my City Fashion Week. I was asked or invited to show my collection out of Australian Fashion Week. So that was 1996. And I was part of a group called New Generation. And so I had to come up with 15 outfits with 15 models. So that was definitely one of actually my first stand-up what occurred. And it was milestones, to actually move to the next step in my career, I suppose.
Australian's fashion samurai, Akira Isogawa, was celebrating not only his 25th anniversary and doing so in style at the Powerhouse Museum, but by hosting a very special retrospective exhibition and also the release of a commemorative book. A major retrospective on Akira's life's work was staged at the Sydney Powerhouse Museum, running from the 15th of December 2018 to the 30th of June 2019. The exhibition was Akira's first major retrospective, emphasising his inspirations and influences, starting with the top, which was a garment designed by Akira in 1994 for his collection Not Made in Japan. The exhibition is divided in 4 themes: journey, kimono, collaboration, and craftsmanship. Akira indicated that as well as what he's previously donated, he will be donating a further 100 pieces, bringing the museum's archive collection to a total of 200.
Yeah, well, majority of actually sample collection display here is from my own personal archive of last 25 years, which I have actually donated to Mars.
How much work do you put into your garments?
Well, I tend to actually put more than 100% of myself into garments when it comes to sample making. I physically actually cut materials, and then I physically actually even hand sew, hand finish it. You know, I'm always there working with a sample machinist to ensure that actually the garments get sewn up correctly.
How much time would it take to make a dress like this one?
Yeah. Because it's a hand embroidered and also a hand woven. I think it would take actually quite a few months, maybe, or for sure more than 2 months just to prepare textile. Yeah, and then we've got actually cut and sew, and also make a pattern as well. And I found actually a group of people, the women actually, they hand embroidered with a bird motif for me. Yeah, and then it's lined with silk georgette, which is digitally printed. Yeah, it's a quite intricate design, really.
And who did you make these costumes for?
These costumes are made for Sydney Dance Company, the production called Grand in 2005. It's all designed based on draping. We draped fabric on dancer's body and then pinned it and then stitched. It was an interesting process.
What are some of your earliest memories working with fabric?
My first actually memory of touching and feeling fabric was actually tea towel, actually in the kitchen where I was helping my mother cooking. And it was just a square, oblong-shaped cotton cloth. And I remember actually just playing with it. And then in fact, even actually wrapping, the cloth around my body and then against my body, and see it actually could be a dress or could be actually top or it was actually fun.
The Akira story starts 59 years ago in Kyoto, Japan. Kyoto is the former imperial capital, and just like Akira, it's a perplexing study of contrast. An ancient city electrified by the breathtakingly new.
Kyoto, it's like an ancient city. It's been actually around way before I was born. In fact, actually more than 1,000 years old.
There one can cruise the futuristic food halls of department stores before zipping up to their traditional floor to view antique kimonos and ancient tea ceremony implements.
What's fascinating about Kyoto, well, it's actually generally speaking Japan, two extreme, modern and then also tradition, they coexist, and it's always interesting.
It's a city with 2,000 ancient temples and shrines, where you can get a glimpse of a geisha gliding down a cobblestone lane and instantly feel yourself catapulted back to the 18th century, until you see her duck into a very 21st century taxi with doors that open and shut automatically. Akira was born on December 25th, 1964, into a Kyoto family where tradition was everything. Discipline was high and expectations were fierce, and much remained unsaid.
But wanting to express myself fully under the circumstances, like growing up with my family who has such a strong traditional values, and I mean that's great because it does give you a sense of like a discipline, And it's like being army, almost a bit like that. But at the same time, like being a teenager, like, you know, we want to break all the rules.
Isogawa's father, Hisao, belonged to a clan that was proudly protective of its bloodline. Isogawas had lived in the same location for hundreds of years, but male heirs were in short supply, and with Akira being a gay man, so the birth of Akira's brother, Takashi, in 1960 was welcomed, marking the first child of its generation who could carry on the family line. Akira grew up surrounded by kimonos, uninterested in sport, preferring to spend his time drawing.
Traditional Japanese wear, it is called kimono. Kimono, in English, it means things to wear. It's just a thing that we wear. It's just a square piece of cloth, easy to fit, and then it has a belt. It's called obi. Because it's such a simply constructed the piece of garment, the cloth itself is actually, in fact, that's what makes it special. So they apply like beautiful prints or embroidery on the cloth, and I'm inspired by that. Kimono, I think, has endless possibilities in terms of the shape, or in terms of actually textile itself, in terms of how it is constructed. Every time I look at kimono, I see something new. I grew up with the kimono, and that is actually a garment that I find it actually most relatable for me. Also respecting some sense of my heritage, and then to be truthful to myself. I mean, regardless of actually how many years really I've been actually living, or, you know, going back and forth to Europe to Australia, or Bali to Australia, but my root is actually Kyoto in Japan. So I do respect the fact that actually that is something that actually I'm not able to change history. When I first arrived in Australia, I was 21 years old. I felt that I needed some seriously casual clothes.
He stayed on and enrolled to study fashion design at the famous East Sydney Tech under Nicholas Huxley.
My name is Nicholas Huxley. I was the head of the fashion design studio at TAFE since 1990. Before that, I've been actually teaching for nearly 40 years. I finished in 2018 after some adventures around the world, and I am currently mentoring designers in Fiji. Over that 40 years, I've had the great pleasure of seeing some, I'd say, sort of stalwarts of the fashion industry come through the school that I've mentored, people like Akira Isogawa, Alex Perry, the guys from Romance Was Born, Anna and Luke, Bianca Spender. Then we go on to people like Dion Lee, Nikki Zimmerman, and it just goes on and on. There's lots and lots of them. I've been very, very, very lucky that I had that period where those people actually came to that school, and I got to grow with them, you know, watch their talent grow and then become successful. So Akira Isogawa, to this day, I would have to say, was and is the designer that I taught a little bit, but the Australian designer that I'm most proud of, because Akira has never, ever, ever given his identity away as a designer for the dollar. He, you know, his work is beautiful. It's his work. Every piece of his work is exhibition worthy. A lot of fashion labels cannot say that, right? Everything he does, you know, especially in the iconic days, just that he has always loved where he's from and has always done beautiful work adapting kimonos and just, you know, and adding beautiful things. And, you know, I just really appreciate his technique. He does very simple things, but he just has this wonderful craft. They're pieces of artwork. And I'm not into wearable art, but these aren't even these are just beautiful, beautiful garments. And I think that anybody who's owned an Akira will always love wearing an Akira because they feel very special.
Several high-profile collaborations followed with Graham Murphy's Sydney Dance Company and also the Australian Ballet.
Hello, I'm Graham Murphy. I was artistic director of the Sydney Dance Company for 31 years. It was a company that was pioneering contemporary dance in Australia. I now work as a freelance choreographer. I'm working across all disciplines. I love opera, I love theatre, I love film, and of course dance is my number one passion. I feel that art is about storytelling, whether it's a piece of music, painting, whether it's a frock. I think everything has a story hidden within it, and I love the narrative. I think Akira responds to the narrative, and Salome was a perfect example of a work that had a very strong story. It started as a biblical story. Oscar Wilde got hold of it and made it his own, and we based our Salome on the Oscar Wilde. It gave us great scope. Everything was in extremes in that production. And yet it had a beautiful Arabic exoticism which fired both our imaginations. So it was a great labour of love, and it was a huge success for the company. Air and Other Invisible Forces, another great labour of love, and it seemed to me to be a logical choice to use Akira. This was an abstract work. It had no narrative per se, but it was so much about discovering concepts, ethereal concepts of air. And I thought, well, Akira and the fabric and the way they move and his sense of floating, the sense of unreality was really perfect. I took my conceptual aspects. And Akira was so respectful of the tribute that he was making to my mother, that I just felt there was such incredible sensitivity. Akira is somebody who responds to the poetic. Having said that, he is very time aware. He's very astute to the big picture. And so for me, it was just a matter of giving him, if I had a concept, of giving him a poetic, not dictating, just talking in the loosest terms about what was required. And he would listen very calmly, very quietly, and come back with beautiful ideas. So I learned very early, give the man poetry and he'll give it back to you in fabric.
Like I must say actually create this process only the last 10 years plus has been through collaboration, really, and even actually including for my own work. because I collaborate with Tricia Nadiman, a friend of mine, and she had worked for me for like decades since the beginning, and she's a collage artist. So it's a collaboration. She gives me actually ideas, and we inspire each other. Yeah. And then also through other collaborations, for example, working with Graham Murphy or other artists for theatre and dance. That the event itself is very inspiring. Yeah, so I think collaboration is actually really the way for me at the moment. I used to sketch every single shape, like, I show runway. I suppose because that's what I was told when I was like studying fashion. Okay, if you have to do a lot of sketches. But now actually I just design without even drawing anything. I just start designing actually using fabric and then draw on the mannequin and start shaping garments. Yeah. I believe 1998, the show that actually I first presented as one designer, totally responsible for runway. It was great fun. What was actually outstanding was actually not only having actually a show which presented my own collection with, I think there were actually more than 60 looks there. But after party was actually great fun. I remember Graham Murphy, back then actually he was working as a creative director of Sydney Dance Company. I mean, he founded the Sydney Dance Company with Janet Mernon. So I remember I was working for Sydney Dance Company in 1998 for production called Salome. So Sydney Dance Company was kind enough to offer some dancers to showcase actually some of my costume I designed after party, at the Sydney Opera House. So the number of us are invited to sit at the, Opera Theatre there, so we view actually, their show.
I'm here at the Bennelong restaurant. This is the actual room where we staged the Akira Isogawa after party, after his very first Fashion Week, before it was even called Mercedes-Benz Fashion Week. And we had the whole floor here for our private function. It was decorated. There was a cast of every glamorous person in Sydney and also from around in the fashion world. There were movie stars, there were dancers, and it was a memorable night. And I remember I was babysitting a couple of Hollywood guests who happened to be in Sydney that night, or they were there for that month, I think it was, or maybe even 2 months. They were filming The Matrix, the very first one, Wachowski brothers. The two people I was looking after that night were none other than Keanu Reeves and Lawrence Fishburne. And I remember Lawrence Fishburne, who was sitting next to me when we did the private preview of Graham Murphy's Salome in one of the main theatres in the Opera House. He was so blown away, as everybody was. We turned on a private mini performance of a show that wasn't even scheduled to be on that night. And Lawrence turned to me and said, "Hey, Paul, do you do this sort of thing a lot?" And I glibly turned to him and said, "Lawrence, all the time." It's an incredible place. It hasn't changed. The shelves are exactly as they were. The glass is all original. It's just the location and the venue. You cannot mirror anywhere in the world. Just 3 years after his debut, he found himself showing twice a year at Paris Fashion Week, alongside his idols of Reiko Kubo, Issey Miyake, and Yohji Yamamoto.
Well, I think what actually really made it was in 1997. So I was showing at the Fashion Week as a part of a group called Ready to Wear. That's when the Browns of London, with the influential retailers and fashion retailers in London, they were an audience. And Mrs. Bernstein, who founded Browns and director of Browns, decided that to buy more or less actually like everything I showed on runway. Yeah, and so that was actually a really big deal. And then plus Anna Piaggi, late Anna Piaggi, she passed away, well, a few years back now. And she was also in the audience, and she came back to backstage, and we first met there at the backstage, and then we made an arrangement. She came to my boutique in Ulara, and then she decided to buy a number of my garments, which she wore at the Milan Fashion Week same year. Wow. So I think those events actually was a very, very big deal, actually, I think, for Australian fashion industry. So I think that's made it like, I suppose actually I become like a big event, you know, to become kind of a desirable sort of a commodity, I suppose. I try my best to accommodate, you know, like as many interviews as possible. So, I mean, this is like it's not random event, you know, this is like a really serious entry to a business that will actually suddenly opens up, you know, this opportunity opened up for me. And then in fact, actually 1998, following year, like I was in Paris, you know, already because of demand. Back then it was a fax, actually, not an email. Got so many faxes, particularly from Italy, because Anna Piaggi was very influential, you know, so I received a lot of interest from Italy. So all of them actually, as it turned out, all of them were in Paris during Paris Fashion Week, meaning actually all Italian buyers were in Paris. So I met actually a few buyers there in 1998.
Akira Isogawa is possibly the most talented designer we have. Certainly the most humble, and that's not a word you generally use around fashion designers. He is quite creative, and I can remember a number of his shows. The one that sticks in my mind is the one down at the wharf at the Australian Dance Company, and it was possibly one of the most surreal, serene fashion moments that I've ever been part of. And, you know, to this day, he produces the most eloquent fashion for Australian women and, in fact, women around the world.
Akira, fantastic. Akira is a national treasure, really. And I thought, you know, it was wonderful to sort of, you know, see his evolution in Australia. And I mean, highly respected. You know, there's been museum, you know, gallery exhibitions on his work. He probably could have done with some commercial assistance, I think, on that side of it. I could have been a lot bigger. But, you know, you have to, have the right mindset and the right framework and the right business partners. I mean, Zimmerman is a great success story because Nikki has her sister as her original business partner. I mean, I think Simone works on strategy, but her husband was a lawyer and he's the CEO. So it's a very tough business. So Akira is wonderful, but I would have loved to have seen him get a little bigger than he did.
I remember being so nervous to meet Akira because he did these intellectual, ethereal designs that were just so wonderful. And when I first met him, he was just this cute little man who was so funny and beautiful, and I just wanted to hug him.
I love Akira. He's a sweetheart and such a talent. I mean, the prints and the shapes, the Japanese influence was very strong. And his shows were so beautiful. They used to be so beautiful and so modern and tranquil, and you just felt transported into a very ethereal kind of world.
So I started showing my collection in Paris in 1999. But however, in 1998, I went to Paris and I took my sample collection, but I wasn't able to do the show because I wasn't ready. I was just checking what Paris is like. Paris was like. And then I had appointment with a number of buyers from Italy. And like what happened was actually like the buyers wanted to buy my samples. And so which I did actually. And so I came home empty hand. So that was actually a good result, Yeah. So yeah. When I started showing my collection in Paris, like on the runway, for example, like I don't think I was feeling nervous. Actually, in fact, I was feeling more like really too busy thinking, making sure that actually the presentation or runway show is going to be something that it's what I imagined it should look. And then also want to make sure that actually right person was in audience. Because without audience or right person audience, it's not worthwhile. I engaged myself to a press agent, Michelle Montan. And so she helped me out, just taking care of actually invitation list and also seating plan and so on. And then also I left sample collection in Paris because she had a showroom. So she dealt with basically actually media worldwide. Also someone actually born in Japan, but someone born in Japan and someone actually grew up in Japan, but somehow this person actually started a business in Australia, not in Japan. So I think what was quite interesting, I think, for a lot of people in Paris was that particular mixture of a cultural background, this Japanese versus Australian, and then that somehow, they blend into something new, So I think that particular offering was quite interesting for Europeans, I think. So the standout show I remember, I actually presented, was particularly one in Paris. Year 2000. Year 2000 in October. It was actually held in Marais, huge terrain. It was a shed, really. And apparently, actually, they used to house trains inside. It's massive. So this space was disused, and so space was offered to me as through a press agent in Paris. And so I loved it. Obviously, actually, this is very grand, but yet actually sort of had a feeling of broken, because it's almost a bit ghosty because it hasn't been used for many years. Yes, so we used to do big show 40 plus looks, and then our show was held at very early in the morning, 9:30 a.m. Yes, so that was actually a really big deal for me. Prior to that, so I had another show prior to that in 1998 actually, to be precise, in Paris. Yeah, so that was actually without my press agent. That show was actually organized at myself and then my team. And then we did a show, very, very small presentation with probably 20 models. We did it actually in a showroom, tiny little showroom, but still actually chic, really, because it was held in a Perth arrondissement. It was a really nice address. Rue Daniel Casanova is the name of the street. So that is literally my first show in Paris. So yes, really the one actually I feel that crossed my mind was a big deal was the one in Marais in the year 1999 in October.
Akira, what a gentle, beautiful, creative spirit. He, again, was very true to his, aesthetic and his design philosophy. He was a purist and a wonderful person to know in the industry at that time, highly talented.
Akira was just so kind. He had the most beautiful smile, those eyes. He was always so warm, and he always had the time to talk to you and to share stories and to help you. He was a very calming influence.
I think Akira, I don't think anyone else really was presenting that Japanese aesthetic in a modern way as well as Akira was at the time. It was very new, it was fresh to sort of have this modern wearable interpretation of this, Japanese heritage design.
Well, he's incredibly really humble, Akira. This is the other thing. Like he doesn't consider, he never talks about his success. I still look at every success, and Akira's success in Paris has been absolutely incredible. I'm still blown away by how revered he is in the industry. And I love the fact that people, regardless of time, 10 years can go by and he is considered like an icon in our industry. He's incredibly talented. I love the Australian postage stamp series that they did with all the designers, Jenny Bannister and him and Prue Acton. And, these are key components of the Australian fashion industry that we can't forget, I remember talking to Nicholas Huxley about this, and he said what he fears is that the next generation won't remember a lot of designers. They don't remember history of fashion. And it's really important that designers understand where certain elements of fashion originate from and what inspires fashion. And, Akira has his own technique, which is just so beautiful. And he is what he is. He is that Japanese designer, and he is Japanese, but he has such a strong following with so many Australian women, and it's wonderful to see that he's so celebrated. For somebody that came out to Australia not speaking much English, his accomplishments just blow me away.
Akira has had many recognitions. Australia's first fashion laureate. His work has been shown at many art galleries, including the MCA, the National Gallery of Victoria, and now the Powerhouse. He's even appeared on a stamp.
I think one of actually really big event for me in terms of recognition was I think it was 2006 actually, receiving this award by Australian Post. And then what it was actually I become actually the stamp, like my image, from torso up. It was a big deal only because that's first time actually really my family recognized that that I become actually sort of a name that it's known by many in Australia. And particularly actually I think my father really appreciate that. When I received a call from Australian Post, I was told in fact that there is a group of designers. I think there were 5. So myself, and then Collette Dinnigan, and then Joe Saba, and then Carla Zampari, and then Prue Acton. And then also I think Jenny Bannister maybe, there are 6 I think.
I think Akira Isogawa again, it's a little bit like what you were saying with Collette Dinnigan. He made you realise that Australia could play in the big wide world of fashion and have its own handwriting and its own following and be as creative as anyone else in the world. He's an amazing talent.
One of the turning points for Akira was when the then Vogue editor, Marianne Hume, featured Akira's red kimono dress on the front cover, worn by Naomi Campbell, shot by the legendary Peter Lindbergh.
So it was actually in 1997. I remember actually it was in March. I received a phone call from Vogue Australia, and then the office was in actually somewhere in North Sydney. So I was told that newly appointed editor of Australian Vogue is keen to actually come to visit my studio in Surrey Hills, and which she did, and her name was Marianne Hume. So she asked me to show her some material that I had. That would have been actually 2 months before May, which means 2 months before Australian Fashion Week in 1997. And so she picked actually a number of fabric, and they are all vintage one-off kimono. And she asked me to come up with a minimum of 2 outfits. And then I had less than 5 days, 3 days to finish it, and which I did. And then I couriered to actually the address in Paddington. And in that dress, or both of them, I'm not sure, but at least one of them went to New York. Or sorry, not New York or Paris. I do not know where a photo shoot occurred with Naomi Campbell, but I traveled to offshore and then got dressed by Naomi Campbell, and then Peter Lindbergh took actually picture and went to cover of Vogue. And that was published in May, in time for Australian Fashion Week in 1997. Browns saw my show, And so Fashion Week had a wrap party, which is actually at the end of Fashion Week. I think we had it actually in Nelson's Park. And the little, like really sweet, actually little shed in Nelson's Park. So we had actually like, the wrap party of Australian Fashion Week. And then that's where Vogue Australia launched the new edition of Australian Fashion Week's new editor. Yeah, and so Joan Burstyn was there, Mrs. Joan Burstyn was there. So we all celebrated, like, Naomi Campbell was my dress on the cover.
Akira Isogawa, I can remember, I guess there was Susan Noomsalu, Akira Isogawa, Jodie Boffa and myself that David Jones picked up as the early designers. And so we were the celebrated Australian designers at the time. And Akira, in his very quiet, demure, but very strong Japanese manner, I can remember always buying the old kimonos and putting them together, and the love of fashion, fabric too, and the color. And I think he was, and still is, so successful because it was something that was in his DNA to do, and he created that, and he has very much a signature collection that hasn't moved at all from where it is, but it has a different take every season, I guess, so it modernizes something that's already existing in his DNA. He's a very authentic, artistic, creative soul, and he is, definitely with color and how he started his brand is one of Australia's greatest designers. I think what hasn't happened for Akira, he hasn't been commercialized in a way that hasn't elevated his brand perhaps to the successes of some of the others, and which is opening retail stores and managing the staff, and he's kind of maintained that always on the edge, that very kind of cusp creative designer.
Akira Isogawa, for me, he's an artist, and I think most designers are, but him in particular, I've always had a weakness for Japanese brands. Like Yohji Yamamoto, when I was a kid, I would save everything and only buy one item so that I could buy that, or Comme des Garçons, whatever it is. And for me, seeing what Akira stood for in terms of his fashion and what he did with it here in Australia, he's something else.
Akira Isogawa is a really dear friend, and I just think that he's just amazing, not only for his incredible talent with design, and he's always kept his Japanese ethos with, incredible fabrics. And I remember going to his studio and all his archive collection were hanging there, and it was like another world. We just walked in and we just went, oh wow. It's just like, there were garments hanging from the roof, and it was like these ghosts, just these beautiful silk garments just flowing. And part of me thought to myself, really, this should be probably in a museum kept, in an airtight environment. And then I just thought, this is just so him. There's something incredibly down to earth and earthy about Akira. And he's the most humble person you'll ever meet as a person. And I think that that's what makes Akira so special and so loved in the industry, that he is not really precious about anything, and he'll talk to anyone, and he's just got this following because he's, the whole stories of his, not being able to afford shoes and then sending the models down the runway with the red socks. And I remember he had a dinner years later, he had a dinner and he gave everybody, they had all the buyers from David Jones and all the people that were, celebrating his career. And I couldn't make it that night, and he was so sweet. He sent me this, I've got the photo. In fact, I'll send you the photo, you can use it in footage. And he sent me the little red socks that he gave every guest. And I treasure them today. They're the most beautiful knitted cotton red socks, and they're like little slippers. And I still kept that note that he wrote on a brown paper bag in the socks. And I just thought, there are moments in fashion that you want to kind of remember. And I remember taking that photo and thinking, I'll never delete that photo and I'll never get rid of those socks, because this is a part of fashion history that you want to hang on to.
I think Zen is a quite interesting philosophy, because how hard it is to survive in fashion. And then I was saying that actually you have to give more than 100% of yourself to make it happen, and come up with actually new collections so often, and then not to actually get burned out. and mentally actually stable, not exhausted. Yeah, I think the philosophy of Zen, for example, is certainly actually that did actually help me like a lot to realize that when actually that you are dealing with the stress and difficulty, and then when you have a book to read, and they make you feel grounded, maybe it takes actually a day, and then you just sit and then read, and then next day you're ready. So I think it's nice to have a faith and then some the place you can go back to, and then that's actually really dealing with your internal system and then mind, and that's really important, I think, because you are giving actually so much away of yourself by creating a collection, and then so if you keep going, there's nothing left anymore. Yeah, so obviously you have to actually give yourself a chance to rejuvenate in order to survive. Secret to enduring could be not to force myself to do something that I do not want to do. Not going to a territory that I feel uncomfortable. Just do what I feel that I can not only feel comfortable, but also I believe in. Because really, after all, not only money, but you've got to actually have passion to keep going.
Akira is an anachronism in the world of high fashion. He's unlike the other attention-seeking peacocks and flamboyant provocateurs taking their bows on the world stage. He remains shy, softly spoken, and humble. In fashion, he's the ultimate outsider. He appears uninterested in trends or the amount of fans he has on social media. He's an artist, surrounded by fragments of beauty, trying to piece them and the meaning of life together.